All right, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Dr. Andrea Spofford, and I am poetry editor for Zone 3 Press. We have over 50 people here with us tonight, so thank you very much for taking the time to join us. This reading is sponsored by APSU's Creative Writing Program with the support of the Center of Excellence for the Creative Arts. It's the only center of its kind in the state of Tennessee, and it is through CECA that we are able to facilitate such events. Before I introduce tonight's reading with our first book award winners chosen by Judge Paige Lewis, I'd like to announce an upcoming event. On October 7th at 8 p.m., Creative Writing will be hosting a webinar featuring spoken word poet Sarah Kay as part of our ACUF Chair of Excellence programming. Sarah will also be working with students, so please keep an eye out for that information as it is released. The Center for Excellence in the Creative Arts is also full of events in departments like art and design, music, theater, and dance. So be sure to check out the Facebook page or website for more information on those events as well. So it is my pleasure tonight to introduce Paige Lewis. Paige received their MFA and PhD from Florida State University. In addition to teaching for the Randolph College MFA, they currently teach creative writing at Purdue University. Their first book, Space Struck, was published by Saraband Books in 2019 and is why I asked Paige to judge our first book award contest for Zone 3. Their work can be found in Poetry, the American Poetry Review, the Rumpus, many, many more literary journals. Paige publishes everywhere. And Paige's work has been called a surrealist delight, wonderful and cruel, silky and gruesome. So I read Paige's book for the first time at a difficult point in my life, and I found it to exist as sort of an anchor for me between the real and the not real. And I found myself returning to it over and over again as if it was a salve for that time. So it is my pleasure to introduce Paige Lewis, who will then introduce our first book award winners. Thank you, Paige.
Thank you so much, Andrea. I feel like that was so kind that I'm actually more nervous about this. It's like, oh man, you've promised someone really great, and now I have to live up to it. But thank you, thanks to everyone for coming to this. There's so many participants here. I like that I can't see your faces because I think that would make me more nervous. But I'm excited to know that you exist. And thanks so much to Aubrey and Andrea and Janice and Amy and everyone at Zone 3 and CECA for making this reading possible. And I really want to hurry up and I want to get through this so that I can listen and sit back and listen to these beautiful poems that I know we're going to hear. So I am going to read two short poems and then hand over the mic and then we'll really get started. So earlier today, I learned an interesting thing about the world, which is that scientists have noticed octopides, like octopi, female octopi will actually throw sand and shells at male octopi that they want nothing to do with. And so if an octopi is coming along, they'll just be like, get out of here, and they'll throw shells at them, which I don't know, I love it. And so that made me think of a particular poem that I wrote recently, which is kind of about facts and maybe messing with facts, and it has kind of an octopus in it. And so the poem is called Like the Octopus, a young child can fit through any hole wider than its beak. The scientist in my head tells me I've got my facts wrong. He says, one should always be true in poems, as he pushes up his invisible pince-nez. He says the cannibalistic tadpoles I want to weave into my poem display phenotypic plasticity as a response to the levels of algae in their environment, and it has nothing to do with syllabic consistency or internal rhyme. It doesn't sound nice, it just is. I'm not sure if my desire for niceness is muddying my understanding of the world. I want to know, but I also want to be pleased by what I know. I understand that animals need to eat other animals, but I still root for the rabbit and the hawk simultaneously. Leonardo da Vinci performed vivisection exactly once on a frog and felt felt so guilty after that from that day forward, he stuck to only dissecting what had already died. He wanted to know where the soul resided. I like to imagine the soul in this situation is like a 1930s rubber hose animation, squirming away from this artist's scalpel, wiggling left, then right, then shifting entirely to hide behind the eyes. My inner scientist tries to tie logic to this and comes up with, a soul doesn't have right angles, or else it would slice right through us. There'd be no need to search, for we'd see it peeking through our shoulders, transcendent as a Victorian mirror. Whenever my scientist and I agree like this, it feels as if I'm turning the key to a music box backwards. I delight in the smooth wrongness of it. And then my second and thankfully last poem that I'm going to read is a love poem and a poem about just how particular love can be and how our beloveds seem to know everything, even when we're not telling them the whole story. So this poem is called When I Tell My Beloved I Miss the Sun. When I tell my beloved I miss the sun, he knows what I really mean. He paints my name across the floral bed sheet and ties the bottom corners to my ankles. Then he paints another for himself. We walk into town and play the shadow game, saying, "Oh, I'm sorry for stepping on your shadow," and "Please be careful. My shadow is caught in the wheels of your shopping cart." It's all very polite. Our shadows get dirty just like anyone's, so we take them to the laundromat, the one with the 1996 Olympics-themed pinball machine, and watch our shadows warm against each other. We bring the shadow game home, and this is my favorite part. When we stretch our shadows across the bed, we get so tangled, my beloved grips his own wrist, certain it's mine, and kisses it. And now, oh gosh, how to begin talking about Komal's work without bubbling about her poems for hours. It's hard to forget a title like For Daughters Who Walk Out Like Suns. And it's hard to hear the word without thinking S-U-N, sun, in the title, because this collection is filled with sunlight. Recently, the sun has gone down in Indiana, but I have a feeling Komal is going to brighten things up here on Zoom. Mathew is a graduate of Georgia Institute of Technology and Sarah Lawrence College. Her poems have appeared in Poetry, Diode, Poetry Journal, Beloit Poetry Journal, Crazy Horse, Narrative, and The New Republic. She is the co-founding editor of Josephine Quarterly. I hope that Komal will humor me and read her entire book for us tonight.
Thank you, Paige, for that generous introduction, and what an honor to be chosen and have a cover now. I wanted to give a couple of introductions, but I know I've been told that you don't talk more than your poems, so I'm going to try not to. I'm going to read 7 poems, and I want to give a little bit of background before I read those. I was raised in a small town north of Atlanta. And one of my favorite stories about living there is my mother says when they got there, they didn't know anybody there. So they opened up the white pages and they scrolled down and they looked for Patel, because my maiden name is Patel. And they found the only Patel that lived in town, which is the only Indian family. And they called them and they said, come over. And they are great family friends still to today. So I was raised in a very tight Indian community, but school and the rest of my communities was very different. And so you can imagine what it was like to live like that. I was one of maybe 5 South Asian students in my school. And so the first poem I'm going to read is called Un-American. An American. Every Diwali, I explain to my friends at school why I am so tired. Garba, it's like dancing. Pujas, I guess, like praying. I explain in fragments because even we don't know why we wash statues with milk, why worshiping God takes so many coats. I don't ask, just sit beside my mother when she sings. My sister and I watch our father struggle to cross his legs, his laughter resting on his lifted knees. He closes his eyes, pretending to pray. We believe my mother made this temple herself, found pictures and tiny murtis, gold coins with Shiva, rice and turmeric stored in tiny steel jars. Only she knows where everything goes and how to use it. I've sat at that temple many times, looking at Krishna's blue face and pleasing smile framed inside where life is easy. My mother tells me he is blue because he is so dark. We would not be able to see his face otherwise, she says. Every time I close my eyes to pray, I see Jesus on that cross and taste pennies. His blonde face like the girl in music class who told me not to take the Lord's name in vain. I feel guilty wanting to have stew and tuna sandwiches instead of khichdi. So when my boss showed up at school this afternoon in her maroon and gold sari and called my name, I didn't answer. I walked past her to the car, slid between my sister and her white friend. I wanted to believe that I was still American, hiding in the back seat like a crumpled sari. I'm very interested in talking about journeys, and actually in the middle of journeys, and it's the reason why I draw so much on the Sanskrit epics and the story of the prodigal son. Most people are familiar, but if you're not, the story of the prodigal son is a son that asks his father for an inheritance before his father passes away. And then he spends it all. And when it's time to come back, he comes back to a party, to a celebration with his return. He doesn't come back to a stern lecture or a severe consequence. And that really bothered me. And it still bothers me now to think of that kind of openness and forgiveness. So this poem, The First Time. The first time I heard the story of the prodigal son, I was in college and always jealous, imagining him in his father's robe and ring, eating all that calf. Dishonor is worse than death. I believe it because I'm Indian and hear so many stories about unkept marriages and children who leave their parents in homes where they don't serve Gujarati meals. My father still makes me promise to take care of them, even if I have a better choice, even if the food is not that bad. This time I hear the parable in my friend's living room, sitting on a couch cornered by her piano and fireplace. Her father is describing love as if it were always good. For that prodigal son, in the journey for him starts, I guess it starts with desire and then inheritance, but the desire, when I think about that as part of an immigrant family, we've valued, my parents' journey, and we've heard so many stories about other big figures like Mahatma Gandhi. He was Gujarati, he's from the state in India that I'm from. And so I feel like that was part of my inheritance, was getting these stories, but I feel like my journey hasn't been crossing continents. I think it's been more of a faith journey. So this next poem, I don't want to give too much of a history lesson, and I'm actually fearful of doing any of that and then it being so incomplete you're confused. But Gandhi led a salt march in 1930, and it was to protest the British's tax on the people. I mean, something as basic as salt wasn't affordable to anyone, and then to the poor especially. So from Ahmedabad, which is a city in Gujarat, to the sea, he led a protest. It was about 240 miles. It lasted 24 days. And they harvested salt from the sea, which comes free, right? And defied the British law. He used a word that has always been meaningful to me, satyagraha, instead of what we sort of hear as nonviolent protests. He used satyagraha because it means holding on to truth instead of civil disobedience, which there was nothing disobedient about what he was doing, or passive resistance, because there was nothing passive. It was very active what he was doing. So I borrowed that word for this poem and try to claim it as my own. Satyagraha for thin feet. Like the army you were converting, you took my people and their thin feet and led them to a salty sea. To give them truth, you dressed holiness as a 240-mile braid towards a sordid beach, lifted them like long grain rice, shaky before an anointing. How was I to know that this was a miracle? Thousands walking from one sacrificial place to another. When it passed down to me, I did not inherit the holiness of shifting from sea to salt, child to priest. I became heir to my mother and her garnet ring. Thinking I owned her, I pulled her fingers back, pushed into her ring. I found a place for me to put my cheek, a colonization of skin and blood. Then later, my mother held my hand and packed our lunch at Lavender Pond. She let go because I let go, a symbiosis of skin and blood. And suddenly I owned my body and didn't have to look back. What was I doing but starting my own march into a place of peace and rest, moving toward sacrifice? What was I doing but converting my own body, changing because I was free from the glory of one hand? Satyagraha when I leave good places with thin feet, walking into found places. Satyagraha when I no longer belong to the mutable sea. Satyagraha now that I am yours and you are mine, your glorious, holy body of boats. My husband and I will celebrate our 10th year wedding anniversary in November. I won't tell you all the stories that got us to 10 years, but I will share the two of where we started. So home after homes. 1, a bronze cross from your father's coffin hovers over our headboard. Don't start with the dead first, your father told you. So we start small and alive like we were just planted into the earth. 2, you don't want a house with a yard because weekends aren't meant for work. So we grow gray plants in a city condo. You get up early like your father did to make me egg sandwiches. You measure ice, slice bananas and persimmons into a blender, into shapes, diamonds, toy blocks, caution cones. 3, I learn how to call you every day to ask what we're planting and why and when and for how long. In my old home, a black statue of Ganesh sits with crossed legs in the foyer. Some Americans keep idols in their pockets, my father tells me, even the president, for luck. Pruning seems like the right thing, so I look for some place to put a different clue to all who enter. 4, this is an Indian home, but all I want is our wedding picture and my grandmother's small bowl of salt. Each night I close one eye at a time, trying to see who we really are, the left, right eyes trapping gusts of wind, until I see you, my love, with 3 children, until I see you in a clean home with no yard. After the honeymoon, home. 1, I've been cleaning all day, wiping countertops, sills, and tops of TVs. Sperm can live in you for 3 days, you remind me. I know, like dust collecting on your favorite book, I tell you. 2, we've been killing my mother's mint plant for weeks, taking turns being parents, water, my milk, a small ledge, a crib, an offer of all our pleasant places. Now it's another Tuesday and we have made a dry Medusa mess. I shower, think about adoption, take a 3-mile walk before noticing 2 dogs shepherding 100 goats in the park, chosen, elected to eat invasive kudzu, where a mint plant grows wildly without us. 3, before you were born, I saw both of you as toddlers kneeling under a window of reds and yellows of Jesus the shepherd. I think you will love lambs like he did in foreign places and stained glass windows, those almost shattered pieces. 4. The world gets smaller when you're in the city. The city gets smaller when you're planting tulips in your backyard, imagining yourself a sower, a gardener of 2 little figures of speech formed in a small frame of dust. Oh, unimaginable God, you both came and stayed for more than one night. The one thing I was surprised by when we had kids was how much I would think about bodies. I thought about my body the whole time I was pregnant, each week and each month, and how long my body could handle. I had twins, so carrying 2 at one time. And then I thought about it as when they were born, and at around, I guess, 2 or 3, I had read Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me. And I'm still processing, honestly, all the things that he said. And if you haven't read it, it's a letter to his teenage son. But I was surprised in a big way, because I had been told a completely different story than the story he was telling his son. As an Indian woman, I think I was told from many people, but for sure from my family, like, you're so valuable that you have to cover your body. And still thinking about how some bodies could be invisible when I have 2 sons. And so when I think about them, it's just fear and surprise. And I just remember his letter. And so this poem came out of me processing that. Gifts for a Beautiful Body, after Ta-Nehisi Coates, and to my son. Who am I to tell you now what was given to me by my mother and my mother's mother? A gold bracelet engraved with my name, announcing God's ornament, a visible body covered in star-studded cotton. I wanted to give you gold, myrrh, and frankincense, but your cry kept circling the dim room, hungry and fragrant. I needed your faithfulness of breath, your skipping and pedaling feet, your feet, O Mary of ages. I would have to lie to tell you that death always comes like precious stones. Some are slashed, some buried, so many given invisibility like a gift. Perhaps the only way to see a body is with your own eyes. Perhaps the only way to see a whole body is to see one coming out of you. You survived before you lived, but I still listen for heartbeats in arched places, anxious when people walk around you like broken branches. Blessed be the one who hears you cry out like a million pressed stones, jasper, turquoise, emerald with gold, and uncovers your breath of bees. Blessed be the one who sees you on the sidewalk migrating and declares you good. And this will be my last poem. My daughter is 8 now. She's watching upstairs. And when she was around 5, she asked us a lot of questions about death. And part of that stemmed from some key members of our family not being around. And it started with, why do we die? Where do we go? And then it got to questions that I still can't answer. And so this was my response to one of the questions. After a long walk, my daughter asks why we can't just die together. 1, we have looked at pool covers and rusty drains. We have searched red bushes for thorns, scraped an elbow on a brick step. We've announced no doggy, not over here, then ran with our heads turned back, our long, thick Indian hair blocking our view. We have witnessed iridescent bubbles lit in the soapy sun, waiting, right, left, stop, then danced on the yellow rippled ramps, leading us to new tar roads. My smallest known tour guide, you are not tired. You are never tired. My soreless child, my fossil finder, my bones splintering each year, you grow stronger and faster. 2, we are on the corner going somewhere set in stone, and you lunge towards Spring Street, your small arm pulling towards the curved walkway, your neck beaked like a soldier pulling a flag to the ground. This is the way. I pull and lunge towards church, lining up one foot in front of the other while you keep turning, loving nothing carved from this world. 3, this is important. The tradition of never finishing the ritual, a bedtime routine, a coffee pot on the hot plate again and again, the thin glass that always breaks. But if you do it on purpose, say for a wedding, it will mean something. It will mean something if it never ends. Like all the blue fireworks we watched to lighten your face and darken my shoulder, a memory buried so deep in the room of our living that later you will believe there are brighter places that feel like our home. 4, to go separately means that either I walk behind or you, like a man rushing through morning pedestrians, goes into a building, up the stairs, to an office that's really a room made of boxes and tape. It means like a man, you will go first, and then we can just forget about our walk, Argentina in the summer, the mica clock, the stories will stay on the shelf. To go separately means one of us will die breathing in. It means one of us will walk on cracks hoping for a heart swallow. It means the back of your earring will still be lost and forget about 6 or 7 or 8. It will mean one day folding into 50 years. So why can't we go together? The reasons are wide and deep and high, but we will go separately while one of us waits at the bus stop. Will it be you? One of us will start drinking coffee to remember the plan we had on the calendar to go for a walk that leads you to a coffee shop where I could tell you, I don't love you like the small things you carry in your pocket. I don't love you like the things you carry on your back. I love you like you could live forever. Thank you.